Welcome to the next era. I'm Faizah Baldonado, life design strategist and growth mentor. And this is our space where we get to slow down enough just to notice the patterns shaping how we live, how we think, and how ultimately we make decisions. So if you've been listening to the first few episodes, you'll know that this podcast is really about understanding the quieter shifts that happen as we grow into all these different seasons of our life. And I'm sure you can relate to this. You know, when something once felt really normal, but then it just stops fitting, it doesn't feel quite right anymore. And sometimes something that once felt difficult eventually becomes natural, which brings me to a word that often people laugh at me about when I bring it up. And that word is myelination. And usually that word really gets people and they say, Miley what, Faizah? And honestly, I understand why, because it sounds like something you hear in a neuroscience lecture. But the funny thing is, you've probably experienced it many times in your life. You just didn't know there was a name for it. So myelination, let me break it down like this. So you know when something used to feel really difficult, and then one day you realize it's just how you naturally do things now. For example, driving. Most people remember learning to drive. Do you remember that? Everything felt intense. You were thinking about the mirrors, the pedals, the road, the speed, all of the rules. Your brain was working very hard, but eventually something shifts. You get into the car and you're just driving. You're not consciously thinking through every single step anymore. Your brain has made it automatic for you. So here's what's actually happening. Imagine your brain as this incredibly complex network of pathways, almost like this superhighway for information. And these pathways are made up of nerve fibers that transmit electrical signals throughout the brain and the body. And each nerve cell has a long thread-like section called an axon. And this axon carries electrical messages from one part of the brain to another. So you can imagine the axon is a little bit like wire. And wrapped around that wire is something called the myelin sheath. Now the myelin sheath acts like this insulation around the wire. So sometimes when I explain it to clients, I'll say something like, you can imagine it like blankets wrapped around that wire, helping the signal travel faster and more smoothly. And the more insulation there is, the faster and clearer the signal moves. So then when we repeat a behavior or practice a skill, the brain strengthens that pathway. And scientists call this process myelination, which I love. And I usually translate that into even simpler language as your brain installing a new default setting. I know you can tell I'm excited, but you'll understand why. Okay. Now, another way I sometimes think about this is like walking through a garden. The first time you walk through tall grass, there isn't really a path. You have to push through it. But if you walk that same route every day, eventually this track appears and then it becomes a path. And eventually it becomes the easiest route to take. And your brain works in a very similar way. The more often you walk a certain path in your thinking, your behavior, your decisions, the easier that route becomes. Now, myelination is simply the brain strengthening that path so that the signal travels faster and more smoothly, which means the way we think, the way we respond, and the way we lead ourselves in life is something that becomes easier the more that we practice it. And you see this everywhere. Athletes experience it constantly. You know, when you watch a professional athlete perform, their movements look effortless. But that fluidity didn't happen overnight. I guarantee it. It came from thousands of repetitions. The brain built incredibly fast pathways for those movements. Musicians, they experience the exact same thing. The first time someone learns a piece of music, they're concentrating on every single note. but then eventually their fingers simply know where to go. Actors memorizing lines, surgeons performing these procedures, and anyone learning a new job. At first there is effort, then repetition, and eventually instinct. And this shows up in everyday life as well. Maybe it's when you're setting boundaries that once felt terrifying. Maybe it's speaking up in a room when it used to make your heart race. Maybe it's trusting your own decisions when it used to feel so unfamiliar to do that. But with practice, those behaviors can become natural. And that's not just personal development language. That's your brain strengthening a pathway. Now, I want to say something really important here because people often talk about mindset as this standalone thing. But to me, what I believe is that real change isn't only happening in the mind. It involves your body, your emotions, your instincts, your sense of alignment. When a new way of thinking becomes integrated, it shows up not just as a thought, but as a way you naturally move through life. And your nervous system recognizes it. Your body relaxes into it and your decisions feel clearer. And that's when something has truly become part of who you are naturally. I think about this all the time, even in my own life. You know, when I was 7 years old, my family moved countries. We came to Australia and everything was different. A new school, a whole new environment, a new language. But children are incredible at adapting. And within about 2 months, I was speaking English fluently, even at home. And looking back now, that's a perfect example of myelination. My brain was building new pathways very quickly through full immersion and repetition. And what felt unfamiliar at first eventually became completely natural. And this is also true for professional skills as well. I often think about coaching in this exact way. I had my first life coach in 2008, and that experience completely blew my mind and changed the direction of my life. And that was the moment that I knew how much this work mattered deeply to me. So I threw myself into learning. I studied, I practiced, I immersed myself in understanding people, patterns, behaviors, psychology, leadership, all of it. I invested so much into it. And over time, something interesting happened. And what I felt once needed effort, a lot of effort, just became natural to me or instinctive. So when I sit with a client now, I'm not running through this checklist in my mind. I'm listening. I'm noticing patterns. I'm sensing what's being said and sometimes what's not being said. And that ability didn't appear overnight. That came through years of repetition, curiosity, and genuine care for the people that I work with. And the truth is, it honestly doesn't feel like a job to me. It feels so much deeper than that. It's my life's work, a gift that I've been given and one that I never take lightly. Because when someone trusts you with their time and the deeper parts of their life, that's something that I honestly hold with enormous respect. And I want to say something really important to me here. Understanding how the brain works isn't about measuring our worth by productivity or by our performance. If anything, it reminds us that growth truly takes time. The brain is literally building new pathways. So when something unfamiliar or awkward is happening in the beginning, that doesn't mean that you are immediately a failure. It simply means that that pathway is still new. It's forming. And when you understand myelination, you start to realize something really important. Many of the things that feel natural in life today were once things that you had to learn, which also means the patterns we live with now are often just the paths that we've been walking for a long time. And sometimes the work isn't about forcing ourselves forward. Sometimes it's about just noticing the paths that we've been walking automatically and then choosing a different one. And this is actually one of the reasons the work I do with clients focuses so much on slowing things down, because when we slow thinking down, that's when patterns become visible, right? They show up. We start to see the pathways we've been using on autopilot. And once we can see them clearly, we can begin to practice different ones, right? Not in a crazy, intense kind of way, not overnight, but consistently. And over time, those new patterns begin to feel completely natural. So here's something to sit with. What patterns in your life today feel automatic? Simply because you've been repeating them for years. And if you started practicing a different way of responding, what might begin to feel more natural over time for you? Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.